Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this Firewise webinar. I'm Sarah Allen and I'm the Education Coordinator at the Avon Heath Partnership based in Dorset, which hosts the Firewise UK Communities Project. And I'm going to guide you through today's session. This webinar has been designed in response to the recent fire at Avon Heath, with guests being invited from the communities geographically close to this heath and surrounding woodland. The aim is to explain a bit about Firewise UK and to provide information on risk reduction. So our panellists today include Andy Elliott from Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Rescue Service, who will tell us a bit about Firewise in the UK context. Lynn Ketley, the Firewise UK Communities Officer, who will provide us with practical advice for homes and gardens, and Ben Wallbridge, Land Manager for Avon Heath, who'll explain how the heath is managed with wildfire in mind. The webinar has been recorded, but guests, you will remain anonymous and cannot be seen. However, we'd love for you to get involved by taking part in our polls and using our Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, which you can click on and then post any questions that you have during the course of the webinar. We'll come to these at the end of our Q&A session. Just tick the box if you wish to remain anonymous. To begin this evening, we're going to look at wildfire in the global context. Hannah Robinson has an ecotourism business and has very kindly put together an account of her experience of the wildfire that occurred this year in Fraser Island, Australia, which hit headlines across the world. So we'll just go to Hannah's video now.
Hi, my name is Hannah and I live and work on Gari, Fraser Island. Perhaps you've heard of it or even visited, but if you don't know much about it, Fraser Island is the world's largest sand island. It's the only place in the world that rainforest grows on sand, and it's home to the world's purest dingo. It's a true World Heritage National Park, and people from all over the world come to visit each year. I have been here for 10 of those years. In 2020, Gari Fraser Island hit the headlines all over the world. What started as a cosy campfire among friends ended up burning 87,000 hectares of the 184,000 hectare national park. It burnt for over 2 months and was the worst wildfire that the island has ever seen. Firefighters dropped over 3 million litres of water and fire retardant during the 9-week battle. Though in some places they managed to slow the fire and steer it around sacred indigenous sites, it was only when the rain fell that it finally stopped ripping through the island's fragile ecosystem. We could do nothing but sit back and watch the horror unfold as our beloved adventure playground and home continued to burn. It was horrific. Being the problem solvers that we are and the passionate environmentalists, the helplessness that we felt was just heartbreaking. It was devastating to watch, and I know so many people watching all around the world felt the same. Our minds ran wild with the thoughts, what would be left, how the island would heal, and what would be left of our place. Months on, and we can finally answer some of our burning questions, pun intended. Thanks to the rain arriving, so much is left. We didn't lose our home, and the bush is regenerating at a varied rate depending on the type of bushlands. So much more of the vegetation will take much longer to regenerate, and the scars will remain for hundreds of years yet. But signs of new life are everywhere, and we were particularly excited to see a cicada emerge from its exoskeleton. This is something we'd never seen before, and given how ugly they generally are, we were surprised at how pretty they were when they first emerged. It was quite a magical moment for us, to be honest, a sign we needed to see that the island was starting to regenerate. On my first outing around the island in January, I saw 11 dingoes. Almost all had burnt paws or fur from falling branches hitting them. It would seem that most packs survived, but the challenges of life after the fires are still being felt by our native Wangari. That's what we call dingo. It's dingo in indigenous language. And it would seem that the numbers are dwindling. We believe that this is not only due to a lack of food, but also due to the inevitable increase in fights they're having over territory. The grass trees and the banksia are going nuts. Most banksia species that are in fire-prone regions produce woody seed pods, which open during or soon after a fire, releasing seeds into the post-fire environment. So many native Australian plants are able to thrive after a fire, and some, like the Banksia, actually need fire to germinate. Like I said, the burn scars are easy to see, but fortunately, due to the island's hilly terrain, in some areas the fire has burnt in a mosaic pattern, leaving lots of refuge for wildlife and a great starting point for the island to regenerate. The media coverage was non-stop, I guess because the island is known by the world, but so many bushfires go unreported outside of local news. In recent years, Australians have realised just how vulnerable our way of life is to being destroyed by wildfires. I believe that it's so important that we recognise how easily a campfire can turn into a wildfire, and in some cases, as it was with the wildfire on the island, the rain is the only thing that will bring relief. It seems to me that our weather is becoming more unpredictable than ever, and with so many of us more accustomed to living in densely populated areas, very few can actually read the weather. Sure, we can all check a forecast, of course, but we all know the weatherman isn't always right, and regardless, a forecast is not designed to tell you what will happen if your campfire, barbecue, fireworks, or cigarette sparks a wildfire. I wouldn't wish the fear that we felt during those months on anyone. And having had friends that have almost, in some cases, lost their homes in our recent wildfires, it's fair to say that living through this experience has changed my life, and I have a newfound fearful respect for fire. Well, that's all from me, folks. Thank you for listening to my story, and maybe I'll see you on Fraser Island someday.
Hannah's video really illustrates the trauma that a community can experience both during and after a fire, and we're grateful for her thought-provoking account. Firewise UK works closely with international communities, drawing on their experience. I'd like to now run our first poll to just explore wildfire perception. So if we could bring our first poll up, that would be great. Okay, so wildfire is a problem in the UK. Do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? And if you could pop your answers in there, we'll give you a couple of minutes and we'll see what the results are. Okay, let's see what the results are from that poll. Okay, so 57% of you strongly agree, with 43% agree. And actually that's really telling you, it shows that you are actually living close to an area where you understand that it's a flammable ecosystem. So that's great to see that people have a perception that they do understand what a flammable ecosystem they're living close to. So that's great. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Andy Elliott, who's a station commander with the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Rescue Service and UK Tactical Wildfire Advisor, with research experience in the UK, Europe and South Africa. He's also a Senior Research Fellow in the Wildfire Lab at Exeter University, and we'll go over to you now, Andy.
Thanks, Sarah. This evening I'm going to be running my presentation remotely, so hopefully that will appear for me so I can run it through. Okay, give me 1 second just to get the technology working and we'll make a start. So while that's just setting itself up, hopefully you can all see that initial screen. I'm sure somebody from the UHP team will tell me if not. Well, first of all, good afternoon. Thanks very much for the invitation to present at this second Firewise webinar. I've been asked to sort of bring this back from Fraser Island and put this into a UK context. That's a terrific video there from Fraser Island, where of course they've got fire adapted landscapes. The heathlands and so on around us are not fire adapted, but they were originally fire managed. Let's just see if we can move this forward. I'm still waiting to get control of this. Okay, brilliant. So my name is Andy Elliott, as Sophie said. Amongst other things, I've been a firefighter for 38 years now, and I've been fortunate enough to travel the world learning about fighting and managing wildfires. I was introduced to the concept of Firewise at an international wildfire conference in South Africa during 2011. I attended with delegates from around the world and was convinced that the UK could benefit from a Firewise type approach to managing some of our issues here. While I was there, my own fire and rescue service, Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service, was battling a large wildfire at Upton Heath alongside the conurbation of Poole. This was a difficult incident that required a very large number of fire engines and firefighters over several days to extinguish. There were uncontrolled evacuations and real concern by the residents for the safety of their homes. When I returned from South Africa, my chief officer asked me what could be done. I was then appointed as the service wildfire subject matter expert, and we agreed a plan of action based on the Upton Heath fire. I was asked to visit all residents living within the Rural Urban Interface, or RUI, as we now call it, to discuss a Firewise type approach. And we created the UK's first wildfire safety leaflet based around the Firewise principles. Other fire rescue services became interested in Firewise, and the National Fire Chiefs Council reached an agreement with the NFPA from America to be able to use Firewise under license. In 2014, the UK's first official Firewise community was launched by Michelle Steinberg of the NFPA at Thursley and Surrey. Thursley Common regularly suffers from intense wildfires that have threatened homes and have caused injuries to firefighters. They had another significant incident last year. Sorry, that's gone on to. The UK used to have wildfire seasons every 15 years or so. These wildfire years are becoming much more frequent and much more extreme. Spring and autumn are our highest risk times as the fuels are naturally at their driest. During the summer, our plants are in full growth and full of moisture. However, as our summers get hotter and drier, we are finding that in some years we get drought conditions, which give us fires throughout the summer. Like many places around the globe, our fires are becoming more extreme year on year. Pictured here is part of the destruction at the Boomtown Festival fire in 2016. This is in Hampshire, and the fire destroyed about 90, I believe, cars at the time. In recent years, we've seen an increase in the number of homes and structures being lost to wildfires. This first image is from March this year, when a number of homes were threatened by a wildfire in South Wales. You can see the damage to the fences and gardens. The second picture is from Little Marlow in Essex. This was a fire in 2018. This fire spread from a field of stubble over a main road and into a small industrial estate. It destroyed a home, several industrial units and vehicles, plus severely damaging a garden centre. Wildfires damaging homes doesn't just happen in other countries, it is happening here in the UK and is likely to get worse. This video I've stolen from my colleague in America, Lucian Deaton from the NFPA. It's part of a research project by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety in the USA and demonstrates how embers can ignite fuels close to the home or even penetrate through open windows, broken roof tiles or under decking, etc. We should try to get away from the image that homes are caught up in a wall of flames in wildfires. This is often not the case. It is embers that pose the greatest risk as they travel considerable distances and over obstacles. In 2018, I was sent to Greece to help investigate the Mati fire, which killed 104 people. Many homes were destroyed, and it was interesting to note that those that succumbed to the fire mostly had windows and doors that had been left open during the evacuation. So simple tasks like closing your doors and windows can make a real difference. as well as some of the other things that Lynn will touch on a little later about how to make your home safe from fire. But particularly, it's the embers that get forgotten. So that was a little video from the USA as a research project. This one's much closer to home. This is taken by the Police Air Support Unit over the Upton Heath fire in 2011. And you can see those white areas, that's heat, and all the little white dots are embers floating around in the air. This is using thermal imagery. So it just shows the contrast between hot and cold. You can see clouds and clouds of embers, and you may just be able to make out the homes in the background. It's a little clearer here because it's traditional view, but we're going to zoom in on this particular home that was impacted. Fortunately, no homes were damaged or lost in that fire, but this video will just show the potential in the UK that embers have to start fires. Of particular concern would be things like roof, the valleys on a roof, the gutters if they're full of leaves. And you can see some of those larger embers just floating around in the air. The area itself is not hot at all. People are walking around. You'll see a few people walking about. They're completely unaware of the embers that are settling on the roof, that are dropping down into their gutters, potentially starting a fire that will burn and smolder away out of sight and out of mind for a while. You can see some of those embers just dropping onto the roof. So, where are we today? Well, Firewise UK has become more structured. UK staff are in place with support from over the pond in America. More communities are showing interest and signing up. With the likely impacts of climate change, now is the time to take action and to prepare your homes. Firewise UK, the Beacon Road Firewise community and the University of Exeter teamed up to research the flammability of garden plants. The residents provided samples of the plants in their gardens, which were then analysed in an icone calorimeter. This measures the time to ignition and peak heat release rate, amongst other things. From this, it is possible to determine which plants are more fire prone or more fire resistant, and which plants may generate intense flame lengths beyond 2.5 meters. These intense flames are more difficult for the fire and rescue service to suppress. Researching community involvement like this will help us to better understand the real risk of wildfires in the UK. The University of Exeter team are also part of a much wider research collaboration that is creating a UK fire danger rating system based on UK fuels and weather. This will help to provide an early warning when wildfire danger rises. Sorry, I managed to lose the last slide, but I'll just talk you through that one. So Firewise now, as it happens in the UK, is about the community. This may be just a few homes, it may be an entire street or a collection of streets, it doesn't matter. The Beacon Road Firewise community are a good example of what this really looks like. Preparation days to clear leaves from gutters, to remove fuel plants that are too big or too close to homes, talking to each other along with the fire and rescue service and the local land managers. Perhaps most importantly, it's an opportunity for people to get together, get to know each other, and to discuss things of common concern over tea and cake. We need more communities to become Firewise. Thanks for listening. I'm going to pass you back to the organisers and we'll pick up some questions perhaps a little later on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. That's brilliant. And despite the fact we've had a really wet couple of weeks, we have to date had about 84 wildfires in this area. And the Wareham Forest Fire of 2020 is still really fresh in our minds. It's really worth knowing that there are practical things that communities can do to help reduce their risks. So next, we're going to move on to Lynn Ketley, who is responsible for Firewise UK project here in Dorset and is working with communities in risk reduction. She's going to tell us a little bit about what people can practically do to their properties and gardens. Okay, over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi everybody, I'm Lynn and I'm the Firewise Communities Officer. And my role is to identify and work with at-risk communities to help them to reduce their risk from wildfire. And as it says on the screen there, however remote the risk seems, it pays to be prepared. Our heaths, woodlands and open spaces are wonderful places, and living next door to them is an absolute privilege. However, as my colleagues Sarah and Andy have both said, wildfires are occurring now in the UK. So what can we do about the emerging threat of wildfires to our community? So let's ask ourselves the question, what does Firewise mean for me? Well, the Firewise project is about communities working together to reduce their risk from wildfire. And if there's one thing that the current pandemic has taught us, it's the value of communities working together. And Firewise really would like to build on that and increase community cohesion and resilience. So Firewise provides practical, inexpensive steps that homeowners and home occupiers can take to reduce their risk from wildfire. And it's equally relevant to individual homeowners or communities. The reason that most community plans fail is because they are imposed from the top down without the participation from the people most affected by the plan. And this is where Firewise is different. Communities are supported by the Urban Heath Partnership with information and advice, but the homeowners and occupiers run their Firewise community. And so far, we've produced a leaflet giving basic Firewise information, together with a fridge magnet, which was a request from the Beacon Road group. And that has the top 8 tips that they thought were the most relevant. And we also have our Facebook page that we would encourage everyone to follow for ongoing advice. And as Andy said, we were asked what plants are less likely to catch fire during a wildfire. I'm working with Andy and Professor Claire Belcher, who runs that wildfire lab. Our community took their plant samples from their gardens, and there was a big bootful of plant samples, which was fantastic. And these were actually tested in the wildfire lab. And as Andy said, we're producing a leaflet giving details about more fire-resistant plants. And at the moment, it's currently at the draft stage, so watch this space. And the project is about communities working together to identify and reduce risks, which increases resilience and emphasises that we all have a part to play and we can all help ourselves. So this is a picture of a wildfire that happened in Ferndown, on Ferndown Common, and I believe that was 2018, I believe. And firefighters around the country are having to deal with increasing numbers of wildfires every year, but they can't do it alone. Wildfires use up lots of fire service resources, and these are often tied up for long periods fighting the wildfires and dealing with the hotspots that they cause. So when living close to the countryside, it's important that homeowners help prepare their property and neighbourhoods for the next wildfire. And our Beacon Road community suggested that a fridge magnet would be a good idea, and so we produced one, as I said, with the 8 top tips for your garden, which shows the inexpensive actions around the home that can help reduce your risk and support our firefighters. So as Andy said, the biggest risk is posed by embers during a wildfire. So number 1 on our list was clear leaves and other vegetation from roofs, gutters and decks. So here you can see a well-blocked gutter, and all we ask is that you clear that a couple of times a year, even once a year if that's all you can manage, but work with your neighbours. If you've got vulnerable neighbours, ask them if they need any help. So number 2 and number 3 can be seen together. So remove dead vegetation and other items from under your deck and within 10 feet of your house, and screen areas below patios and decks with wire mesh to prevent the accumulation. So here you can see a basic deck. So it's nice and clear on the top, but you'll notice that there is quite a big gap underneath. And that's where the embers can get during a wildfire. So as I say, if you can put some wire or block it in, that will help prevent embers penetrating. So number 4 is remove flammable materials, for example, wood piles from the vicinity of your house if possible. And here's a picture of a wood pile, and you'll see that it's underneath the window, next to another window, and also next to a door. So what we would ask is have a look around your garden, see if there's somewhere else that you can put it, because remember, those embers, again, if they were to get in there, that could cause a real fire up against your house. So have a look around your garden and see if you do have a wood pile, see if you can recite it elsewhere. Number 5, prune trees so that the lowest branches are 6 to 10 feet from the ground. So here's a picture of a house with a tree with branches that overhang the roof of that house. Now, the first thing to remember is that if you do think that you have an issue with branches touching your roof, the first thing to do is to check if there is a TPO or tree preservation order on the tree concerned. And you can do that by contacting your local authority, and they will be able to advise you on this. And only if they say that there isn't a TPO should you then cut any overhanging branches down to reduce your risk. So keep your lawn hydrated and maintained. So here's a picture of a lawn, and I don't think any of our lawns currently look quite as dry as this in the current climate. However, they do get like this during the summer. And again, think back to those embers. If they were to land on that, they would very well set it alight. So when lawns are very dry, the risk is increased, especially from those embers. So keeping it mowed and watered is essential. And consider using grey water during drought conditions and water shortages. And that's a good way to ensure that your lawn remains hydrated. Number 7, dispose of lawn cuttings and debris quickly and responsibly to reduce fuel for any fire. Now, I haven't got a picture for this one, but if you live backing onto a heath or open land or woodland, don't put lawn cuttings over your fence. It's considered fly tipping and hugely increases your risk, particularly from those embers once again. If you've got a wooden fence, that can act like a wick for the flame up to your house. So that's what we need to guard against. Use a green bin if you've got one, or take them to your nearest dump. And finally, inspect roof tiles and replace or repair as necessary to prevent ember penetration. And here's a picture of a roof, and you'll see there's no actual gaps in the roof, but there are 1 or 2 tiles that would benefit from being pushed back, mended. So inspect your roof tiles from time to time. That's all we ask. And that again, if you've got any gaps, get them filled in, because again, the embers can penetrate any holes in roofs. So that's a brief description of Firewise and what you can do to keep yourself safe. And thank you for listening. And now what I'd like to do is show you a video made by the Beacon Road community.
Duncan and I are standing on Upton Heath at the end of March 2021. You can see the height of the dried out undergrowth and the gorse, and you can also see how close our homes are to the heath.
Locally, Thursday the 9th of June 2011 will remain in people's minds as the day of the worst fire to affect local residents here in Dorset. It was Dorset's biggest heath fire in over 40 years. A fire was set deliberately upon Upton Heath. Residents adjacent to the heath were put on alert that their homes could be at risk as the fire spread rapidly.
Residents were told to close all windows and doors and lock their doors and leave immediately.
The blaze lasted for over 8 hours, but fire crews remained on site for days, putting out small pockets of fire and dampening down. The fire destroyed over 247 acres of SSI heathland, a third of the heath.
In the aftermath, we realised that communication was the key, so we began to set up a local Firewise community. We're a coordinated community now, and we have a plan. People are supported and they're informed. We all know each other. We all have our phone numbers. We can stay in touch. We alert to an emergency if need be, and we can arrange a central point for gathering and getting information. Most importantly, we're all friends. Some households have changed, some people have moved on, and new residents have moved in, but we know who they are and what their capabilities are. We have a communal fireproof box, locked against theft, but to which we all have access. It contains cones to close the road, high-vis jackets, and so on.
We organise regular fire reduction parties to keep the undergrowth down close to our homes and to clear fire ditches. We've lobbied the Wildlife Trust, which manages the heathland, to clear fire breaks, fire roads for fire appliances, and graze cattle to keep the undergrowth in check. So, in summary, we have literally risen from the ashes, stronger, safer, more supported, better coordinated, and better informed. We cannot prevent wildfire, but we can manage the risk. Together.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn. There's so much practical advice there you've just given us, and importantly, it's actually rooted in research, so we know it's good practical advice. And it's great to see the Beacon Road community that are taking action for themselves, building their resilience to fire. We'll let people know more about where they can find information about Firewise at the end of this webinar. Okay, so we're just going to run our final poll of the evening. So if I could just bring that up now, that would be great. So the question is, would you consider being part of a Firewise community if your home was at risk from wildfire? So a simple one, yes, no, or maybe. Let's give you a minute just to fill that one in. Okay, if we just go and have a look at what the answers are. Okay, well, that's good news, isn't it? That's amazing. So 100% are willing to look at the idea of a Firewise community. So that's great. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'd like to now introduce Ben Wallbridge, who is a land manager for Avon Heath. Okay, over to you, Ben.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ben Wallbridge, and I am the Senior Ranger at Avon Heath Country Park, and I also manage the Green Space Team East. So, I manage 30 sites across the east of the county, including Avon Heath, and the rights of way network, and quite a few of these are heathland sites. We need to keep a balance when I'm managing the land there. I need to keep a balance between the needs of visitors, of wildlife, and for wildfire management. The main tools available to me are fire breaks and fuel management. So just to reiterate, there's a nice picture of Avon Heath here. I hope you can all see that now. So these are the sites, some of the sites around the county that you can see on this map that are sites that I manage. I've worked on conservation sites and wildlife sites for 25 odd years, and I first received my fire training when working for the National Trust on Brownsea, as we were the fire crew there. Obviously there's no one on the island there apart from the rangers. So the site I was talking about earlier, this is North Park. This is the network of fire breaks that we have created throughout the park that separate up the park into compartments so that we can fight fire from there. Just to, if you've not really come across the idea of a fire break before, it's a network of defendable lines cut through the vegetation where fire crews can fight a fire from. And back in 2018, when we had that very dry summer, I got in contact with Andy, and he came out and we assessed a lot of the fire breaks and the fire risk across the heathland at Avon Heath, and increased considerably the amount of fire breaks that we have. Now, this next slide shows the fire access and information map that we produce for our sites for the emergency services, the fire crews, police, anyone coming up on site that needs this information. So as you'll see, that there's residents marked on there. There are fire hydrants, there are the fire breaks, the wet ground in case the fire crews can't get in, because we do have fire risk in spring when the ground can be very wet. And this is the kind of information we can hand straight over to a fire crew, so that they know what to do and they're not going to get stuck in the wetter areas, etc. This also goes to the emergency planning department at Dorset County, and they're the ones that actually call in a major incident that would do things like close roads, and it would help coordinate with the emergency services. Got a nice picture here of some of my team doing some of the habitat management, which is greatly reducing the fire risk on site. They are taking out the young pines and the scrub that is growing up, and this is reducing the fuel. We're cutting those down, removing those, and also this is a site. This is a before and after from the same location on South Park at Avon Heath, and you can see it used to be 6 meter plus rhododendron. We have removed that. That has significantly reduced the fire risk in this area. And here's another area within the park. And this is actually South Park. Now, if you look on the left, you can see the vegetation as it was last year or the year before. Last winter, we actually came through and cleared that. In fact, the tree that you can see in the left-hand side, the tall birch tree, is the one that is right next to the track in the right-hand picture. It's just the picture's taken a little bit further away. And you can see how much vegetation we have actually cleared off of the heathland there. Now, actually, this is not only good for reducing the wildfire risk, because what you're doing is you're removing fuel, and so that although it may not stop a fire because it still can move across the heather and the grass there, it hasn't got anywhere near as much fuel. So removing that is really good from a fire point of view. It's also excellent wildlife management as well, because you really need to get sunlight to the ground for the heathland species. So it's a win-win there. And here, unfortunately, you can see the what was the fire in South Park at the beginning of the month, and right in front of my colleague there is that very same tree that you saw in the previous shots. In fact, I'll go back just to show you that, and you can see if we had not cleared that area and just left the scattered trees, then there would have been a lot more fuel, and that could have been a lot more serious. So the fuel that we remove really is rhododendron, pine, bracken, millennia grass, especially in the late winter, and that's one of the reasons we also graze the site, to remove that fire risk and get rid of that dried grass before in fact it dries. So we've removed 25 hectares of scrub in the last 3 years off of the site, which has hugely reduced the fire risk. There are some certain restrictions that we have to abide by, ground nesting bird, disturbance to habitats at certain times of the year, so we can only do the work at certain times. And in fact, we did actually, in this location, we had a log pile that hadn't been removed from the contractors, because once it got into the bird nesting season, they were unable to actually move it legally because a bird had nested in it. Just to give an idea about how important the heathland is, Dorset has up to 2.5% of the world's lowland heathland. So it is an exceptionally rare habitat that we need to protect from incidents like you can see on the screen at the moment. And then just the last thing I want to finish off on was we train our staff. Andy has trained most of my staff in how to assist in firefighting for wildfires. We have a water bowser, which is actually what Marco is using there at the moment, and to water down. And we have rucksacks, and we also have a tractor and a mower, collect mower, so we can cut fire breaks actually right ahead of a fire to assist the fire crews. That is the end of my part. I will pass over now to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ben. Gosh, it's really interesting, all the information you've given us about the amount of work that actually goes on your site with wildfire in mind, and also to keep the communities living close by really safe. So that's great and really interesting information. So we're going to go now to our Q&A session. So if people I think have been posting a few questions while we've been talking, if you've got any other questions you'd like to ask, please do feel free. There's an area at the bottom of your screen. Click on that, post your question in there, and we'll do our very best to answer them. So we've got some real experts in their field here today, so we'll be able to answer some of those questions. So one of the first questions that has come through is there any cost to Firewise? So, I think I'm going to ask Lynn if you're able to join us. Thank you, Lynn.
Yes.
Would you be able to answer that one for us, please?
Yeah, no problem. To become a Firewise community, there is no monetary cost. Just talk to your neighbours. As Andy said earlier, it doesn't matter if it's a whole street or if it's just a few houses. Get together, talk, and then contact us, and we can help you set your community up. The only time that any cost would come in is if you as a community decided that you wanted to get your gutters cleared professionally. And then you might contact a company and see if they would come and clear your gutters. And who knows, if you ask them nicely, they might even give you a discount. I don't know. But to become a Firewise community, there is no cost. It's about talking to your neighbours and then talking to us. I'd be happy to hear from you.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Lynn, for that. Okay, so second question that's come through is, how do we have a fire break whilst maintaining our privacy? And that's a really good question, actually. So I'm going to send that one first to Andy, if that's okay, Andy, if you're happy to answer that one.
Yes, happy to have a go at that. And it's a very common question, and it's a very difficult question to deal with. And I suppose it depends how close you want that screen to be for privacy, I suppose. it depends what that screen is. So there are, for instance, a number of tree species, deciduous trees particularly, that are much less likely to burn and much less likely to be a problem if there were a fire. So species selection is critical. If you want to have a screen of say 2.5, 3 meters of gorse, almost impenetrable, obviously it's green all year round, but it's incredible fuel. It is like rocket fuel when it catches fire. So yes, you would have privacy, but you may lose your home. So it's a balance that needs to be struck. Other things that spring to mind that would be as impenetrable would be holly, but again, holly is more difficult to start to burn, but once it starts to burn, it is very noisy and it burns really well. So it's about probably, if you're going to have a screen for privacy, it's about selecting the correct species. And of course, on some of the habitats we're dealing with, they're protected habitats, so the species list may be limited because of that. So really, I would suggest speaking to the adjoining landowner, whoever that may be, whoever owns the fuel and owns the screen that you're looking to retain, I suppose, unless it's your own garden, of course. Speak to the adjacent land manager and take their view on what can or cannot be done. But very often the choice is limited. I would suggest it's about getting the right amount of distance and balance between fuel and privacy, and that's a conversation between the homeowner and the land manager. And Ben may want to add to that further.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, Ben, if you'd like to just come in here, I don't know if you've got anything extra to add to that.
Only I totally agree with Andy. Gorse is rocket fuel, of which it is. There's quite a difference between young gorse and older gorse. Older gorse is just tinder waiting to go. So yeah, we're quite keen on limiting the amount of older gorse if it's closer to properties. We can't just remove it all, because we have a responsibility to the wildlife, and certain species use older gorse to nest in, or to, in fact, adders specifically like older gorse to actually sunbathe under, and it's often a hibernaculum area. So we have a balance to be made there. But again, we could look at it and we go, well, if it's closer to buildings, then perhaps that place for wildlife is a little bit further away from the property. With regards to if it has environmental legislation over it, so Avon Heath is a site of special scientific interest, we aren't allowed to plant things on that unless they are effectively authorised by Natural England, and they certainly won't authorise things that won't naturally be on a heathland. So the things that we've got at the moment that are probably less flammable, and Andy could be able to answer this better, but I would have considered that the silver birch is probably, of the species that we have across our heathlands, is probably a lot less flammable than a lot of the ones that he's mentioned.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so one more question has come in, and this is probably for you, Ben, as you dipped out. Not gonna get off that easily.
No problem.
Is there, I think you've pretty much answered this actually already in your presentation, but is there anything being done about putting in fire breaks? We already saw your map where you have fire breaks already on site. What about new fire breaks? Are you working on any of those, or is there any plan to put in fire breaks?
I'm completely open to looking at them, and we would need to look at them on an individual basis. We have a balance of what residents want. I think this is why Firewise is going to be important, because we often at land managers will have one neighbour saying, you need to cut it all down for fire, and the other one, next door, hitting the roof if you touch anything near the house, because they want their privacy. So I think Firewise is a really useful tool to actually open up those conversations, so we don't get battered by all parties, and but don't make any happy. We want to work with people to manage these risks. So if anyone has a concern about stuff near their house, then absolutely, I'm more than happy to look at it. I am looking at one at the moment in South Park, and again, there are legal restrictions. I did have I actually suggested a fire break on one of the sites, and we had removed the rhododendron, and the Forestry Commission refused to give us a felling license to create the fire break, and that was on the basis that we had managed the fuel so much that the canopy was so high that the likelihood of a fire coming in off the heathland and being on the actual woodland floor was, as there was no fuel to get it up into the canopy particularly, they refused the felling license on the fact that they considered it a low risk. Okay. So there are things that we can do, and there are things that we can't do, but we're happy to have that conversation with everyone.
That's fantastic. It's definitely a balancing act, isn't it, from what you're saying? And as you say, having a Firewise community, then the community is having a voice and actually being able to have some control and some input into what's happening around their properties is really great as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions we've had posted this evening. So if anybody thinks of any other questions that we haven't managed to answer tonight, or things you haven't had the opportunity to ask, please do feel free to send us an email and we will get back to you. Or we'll have the email address at the end of this webinar. So it just leaves me to say a very big thank you to the team behind the scenes today, and to our speakers, Andy, Lynn and Ben. And finally, our biggest thanks goes to you, our listeners, for participating in this webinar and for getting involved in the wildfire conversation and what we can do to build resilient communities. If you'd like to learn more about Firewise UK or would like to start a Firewise community, please do be in touch with us. Our details are going to be posted at the end of this webinar on the end slide, and we will get back in touch with you. We also post ongoing advice on our Facebook pages, and Instagram page. So do keep an eye on that. Again, details at the end. And within that Facebook page, there's also the fire risk rating is also posted. So it's just good information on when to keep properties particularly watered and so on. So do please keep in touch with us, spread the word, and above all, stay safe. A very good evening to you all.